All right, I think. Why is it putting my audio output or input way down there, I wonder? Huh. Well, in any event, I'll have to tweak that, I guess. No problem. Hello, and welcome back to the latest installment of Storytime Saturdays. I'm your narrator for today, Fragath, and I've got some more selections from Stephen King's Night Shift short story collection from early on in his career for your perusal and enjoyment. I also have a cat here who needs to settle down his girth so I can actually read this. I'm going to tweak the sound on this background audio. It's just slightly loud. It should all just be ambient stuff. It's maybe a bit too relaxing, if anything. Doesn't generate a proper sense of tension. Because right now we're about to do a very suspenseful tale called The Ledge. Which is a little long, but not very long. Um, After The Ledge, I will probably do Quitters Incorporated or The Lawnmower Man. The Lawnmower Man is short. Maybe all three, if I have time. How long is Quitters Incorporated? I think Quitters Incorporated is... it's about the same length. What cat? What? You are perched. You are perched. All right. So, without further ado, I'm going to get a little water in me. I'm going to swivel my swivelly chair. I'm going to get a footrest. And without any further ado beyond that, I'm going to get to reading. The Ledge by Stephen King. Go on, Kressner said again. Look in the big. We were in his penthouse apartment, 43 stories up. The carpet was deep-cut pile, burnt orange. In the middle, between the Basque sling chair where Kressner sat and the genuine leather couch where no one at all sat, there was a brown shopping bag. If it's a payoff, forget it, I said. I love her. It's money, but it's not a payoff. Go on, look. He was smoking a Turkish cigar in an onyx holder. The air circulation system allowed me just a dry whiff of the tobacco and then whipped it away. He was wearing a silk dressing gown on which a dragon was embroidered. His eyes were calm and intelligent behind his glasses. He looked just like what he was, an A number 1 500-carat dyed-in-the-wool son of a bitch. I loved his wife, and she loved me. I had expected him to make trouble, and I knew this was it, but I just wasn't sure what brand it was. I went to the shopping bag and tipped it over. Banded bundles of currency tumbled out on the rug, all 20s. I picked one of the bundles up and counted. 10 bills to a bundle. There were a lot of bundles. $20,000, he said, and puffed on his cigarette. I stood up. Okay. It's for you. I don't want it. My wife comes with it. I didn't say anything. Marcia had warned me how it would be. He's like a cat, she had said. An old Tom full of meanness. He'll try to make you a mouse. So, you're a tennis pro, he said. I don't believe I've ever actually seen one before. You mean your detectives didn't get any pictures? Oh, yes. He waved his cigarette holder negligently. Even a motion picture of the two of you in that Bayside motel. A camera was behind the mirror, but pictures are hardly the same, are they? If you say so. He'll keep changing tracks, Marcia had said. It's the way he puts people on the defensive. Pretty soon he'll have you hitting out at where you think he's going to be, and he'll get you someplace else. Say as little as possible, Stan, and remember that I love you. I invited you up because I thought we should have a little man-to-man chat, Mr. Norris. Just a pleasant conversation between two civilized human beings, one of whom has made off with the other's wife. I started to answer, but decided not to. Did you enjoy San Quentin? Kressner said, puffing lazily. Not particularly. I believe you passed 3 years there. A charge of breaking and entering, if I'm correct. Marcia knows about it, I said, and immediately wished I hadn't. I was playing his game, just what Marcia had warned against, hitting soft lobs for him to smash back. I've taken the liberty of having your car moved, he said, glancing out the window at the far end of the room. It really wasn't a window at all. The whole wall was glass. In the middle was a sliding glass door. Beyond it, a balcony the size of a postage stamp. Beyond that, a very long drop. There was something strange about the door. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. This is a very pleasant building, Kressner said. Good security, closed-circuit TV and all that. When I knew you were in the lobby, I made a telephone call. An employee then hot-wired the ignition of your car and moved it from the parking area here to a public lot several blocks away. He glanced up at the modernistic sunburst clock above the couch. It was 8:05. At 8:20, the same employee will call the police from a public phone booth concerning your car. By 8:30, at the latest, the minions of the law will have discovered over 6 ounces of heroin hidden in the spare tire of your trunk. You will be eagerly sought after, Mr. Norris. He had set me up. I had tried to cover myself as well as I could, but in the end I had been child's play for him. These things will happen unless I call my employee and tell him to forget the phone call. And all I have to do is tell you where Marcia is, I said. No deal, Kressner, I don't know. We set it up this way just for you. My men had her followed. I don't think so. I think we lost them at the airport. Kressner sighed, removing the smoldering cigarette holder, and dropped it into a chromium ashtray with a sliding lid. No fuss, no muss. The used cigarette and Stan Norris had been taken care of with equal ease. Actually, he said, you're right. The old ladies' room vanishing act. My operatives were extremely vexed to have been taken in by such an ancient ruse. I think it was so old they never expected it. I said nothing. After Marcia had ditched Kressner's operatives at the airport, she had taken the bus shuttle back to the city, and then to the bus station. That had been the plan. She had $200, all the money that had been in my savings account. $200 and a Greyhound bus could take you any place in the country. Are you always so uncommunicative? Kressner asked, and he sounded genuinely interested. Marcia advised it. A little more sharply, he said, Then I imagine you'll stand on your rights when the police take you in, and the next time you see my wife could be when she's a little old grandmother in her rocker. Have you gotten that through your head? I understand that possession of 6 ounces of heroin could get you 40 years. That won't get you Marcia back. He smiled thinly. And that's the nub of it, isn't it? Shall I review where we are? You and my wife have fallen in love. You have had an affair, if you want to call a series of one-nighters in cheap motels an affair. My wife has left me. However, I have you. And you are in what is called a bind. Does that summarize it adequately? I can understand why she got tired of you, I said. To my surprise, he threw back his head and laughed. You know, I rather like you, Mr. Norris. You're vulgar and you're a piker, but you seem to have heart. Marcia said you did. I rather doubted it. Her judgment of character is lax. But you do have a certain verve, which is why I've set things up the way I have. No doubt Marcia has told you that I am fond of wagering. Yes. Now I knew what was wrong with the door in the middle of the glass wall. It was the middle of winter, and no one was going to want to take tea on a balcony 43 stories up. The balcony had been cleared of furniture, and the screen had been taken off the door. Now, why would Kressner have done that? I don't like my wife very much, Kressner said, fixing another cigarette carefully in the holder. That's no secret. I'm sure she's told you as much. And I'm sure a man of your experience knows that contented wives do not jump into the hay with the local tennis club pro at the drop of a racket. In my opinion, Marcia is a prissy, whey-faced little prude, a whiner, a weeper, a bearer of tales, That's about enough, I said. He smiled coldly. I beg your pardon. I keep forgetting we are discussing your beloved. It's 8:16. Are you nervous? I shrugged. Tough to the end, he said, and lit his cigarette. At any rate, you may wonder why, if I dislike Marcia so much, I do not simply give her her freedom. No, I don't wonder at all. He frowned at me. You're a selfish, grasping, egocentric son of a bitch. That's why. No one takes what's yours, not even if you don't want it anymore. He went red and then laughed. One for you, Mr. Norris. Very good. I shrugged again. I'm going to offer you a wager. If you win, you leave here with the money, the woman, and your freedom. On the other hand, if you lose your life. I looked at the clock. I couldn't help it. It was 8:19. All right, I said. What else? It would buy time, at least. Time for me to think of some way to beat it out of here, with or without the money. Kressner picked up the telephone beside him and dialed a number. Tony? Plan 2. Yes. He hung up. What's Plan 2? I asked. I'll call Tony back in 15 minutes, and he will remove the offending substance from the trunk of your car and drive it back here. If I don't call, you will get in touch with the police. Not very trusting, are you? Be sensible, Mr. Norris. There's $20,000 on the carpet between us. In this city, murder has been committed for 20 cents. What's the bet? He looked genuinely pained. Wager, Mr. Norris, wager. Gentlemen make wagers. Vulgarians place bets. Whatever you say. Excellent. I've seen you looking at my balcony. The screen's off the door. Yes, I had it taken off this afternoon. What I propose is this, that you walk around my building on the ledge that juts out just below the penthouse level. If you circumnavigate the building successfully, the jackpot is yours. You're crazy. On the contrary, I've proposed this wager 6 times to 6 different people during my dozen years in this apartment. 3 of the 6 were professional athletes like you. One of them a notorious quarterback, more famous for his TV commercials than his passing game. One a baseball player. One a rather famous jockey who made an extraordinary yearly salary and who was also afflicted with extraordinary alimony problems. The other 3 were more ordinary citizens who had differing professions but 2 things in common: a need for money and a certain degree of body grace. He puffed his cigarette thoughtfully, and then continued. The wager was declined 5 times out of hand. On the other occasion, it was accepted. The terms were $20,000 against 6 months' service to me. I collected. The fellow took one look over the edge of the balcony and nearly fainted. Kressner looked amused and contemptuous. He said everything down there looked so small. That was what killed his nerve. What makes you think? He cut me off with an annoyed wave of his hand. Don't bore me, Mr. Norris. I think you will do it because you have no choice. It's my wager on the one hand, or 40 years in San Quentin on the other. The money and my wife are only added Phillips, indicative of my good nature. What guarantee do I have that you won't double-cross me? Maybe I'd do it and find out you'd called Tony and told him to go ahead anyway. He sighed. You are a walking case of paranoia, Mr. Norris. I don't love my wife. It is doing my storied ego no good at all to have her around. $20,000 is a pittance to me. I pay 4 times that every week to be given to police bagmen. As for the wager, however, his eyes gleamed, that is beyond price. I thought about it, and he left me. I suppose he knew that the real Mark always convinces himself. I was a 36-year-old tennis bum, and the club had been thinking of letting me go when Marcia applied a little gentle pressure. Tennis was the only profession I knew, and without it, even getting a job as a janitor would be tough, especially with a record. It was kid stuff, but employers don't care. And the funny thing was that I really loved Marcia Kressner. I had fallen for her after 2 9 o'clock tennis lessons, and she had fallen for me just as hard. It was a case of Stan Norris luck, all right. After 36 years of happy bachelorhood, I had fallen like a sack of mail for the wife of an organization overlord. The old Tom sitting there and puffing his imported Turkish cigarette knew all that, of course. And something else as well. I had no guarantee that he wouldn't turn me in if I accepted his wager and won, but I knew damn well that I'd be in the cooler by 10 o'clock if I didn't. And the next time I'd be free would be at the turn of the century. I want to know one thing, I said. What might that be, Mr. Norris? Look me right in the face and tell me if you're a Welsher or not. He looked at me directly. Mr. Norris, he said quietly, I never Welsh. All right, I said. What other choice was there? He stood up, beaming. Excellent, really excellent. Approach the door to the balcony with me, Mr. Norris. We walked over together. His face was that of a man who had dreamed this scene hundreds of times and was enjoying its actuality to the fullest. The ledge is 5 inches wide, he said dreamily. I've measured it myself. In fact, I've stood on it, holding on to the balcony, of course. All you have to do is lower yourself over the wrought iron railing. You'll be chest high. But, of course, beyond the railing there are no hand grips. You'll have to inch your way along, being very careful not to overbalance. My eye had fastened on something else outside the window, something that made my blood temperature sink several degrees. It was a wind gauge. Kressner's apartment was quite close to the lake, and it was high enough so that there were no higher buildings to act as a windbreak. That wind would be cold, and it would cut like a knife. The needle was standing at 10 pretty steadily, but a gust would send the needle almost up to 25 for a few seconds before dropping off. Ah, I see you've noticed my wind gauge, Kressner said jovially. Actually, it's the other side which gets the prevailing wind, so the breeze may be a little stronger on that side. But actually, this is a fairly still night. I've seen evenings when the wind has gusted up to 85. You can actually feel the building rock a little. A bit like being on a ship in the crow's nest. And it's quite mild for this time of year. He pointed, and I saw the lighted numerals atop a bank skyscraper to the left. They said it was 44 degrees. But with the wind, that would have made the chill factor somewhere in the mid-20s. Have you got a coat? I asked. I was wearing a light jacket. Alas, no. The lighted figures on the bank switched to show the time. It was 8:32. And I think you had better get started, Mr. Norris, so I can pull Tony and put Plan 3 into effect. A good boy, but apt to be impulsive. You understand. I understood, all right. Too damned well. But the thought of being with Marcia, free from Kressner's tentacles and with enough money to get started at something, made me push open the sliding glass door and step out onto the balcony. It was cold and damp. The wind ruffled my hair into my eyes. Bonsoir, Kressner said behind me, but I didn't bother to look back. I approached the railing, but I didn't look down. Not yet. I began to do deep breathing. It's not really an exercise at all, but a form of self-hypnosis. With every inhale-exhale, you throw a distraction out of your mind until there's nothing left but the match ahead of you. I got rid of the money with one breath, and Kressner himself with two. Marcia took longer. Her face kept rising in my mind, telling me not to be stupid, not to play his game, that maybe Kressner never welched, but he always hedged his bets. I didn't listen. I couldn't afford to. If I lost this match, I wouldn't have to buy the beers and take the ribbing. I'd be so much scarlet sludge splattered for a block of Diekman Street in both directions. When I thought I had it, I looked down. The building sloped away like a smooth chalk cliff to the street far below. The cars parked there looked like those Matchbox models you can buy in the five and dime. The ones driving by the building were just tiny pinpoints of light. If you fell that far, you would have plenty of time to realize just what was happening, to see the wind blowing your clothes as the earth pulled you back faster and faster. You'd have time to scream a long, long scream. And the sound you made when you hit the pavement would be like the sound of an overripe watermelon. I could understand why that other guy had chickened out, but he'd only had 6 months to worry about. I was staring at 40 long, gray, Marcia-less years in the eye. I looked at the ledge. It looked small. I had never seen 5 inches that looked so much like 2. At least the building was fairly new. It wouldn't crumble under me. I hoped. I swung over the railing and carefully lowered myself until I was standing on the ledge. My heels were out over the drop. The floor on the balcony was about chest high, and I was looking into Kressner's penthouse through the wrought iron ornamental bars. He was standing inside the door, smoking, watching me the way a scientist watches a guinea pig to see what the latest injection will do. "Call," I said, holding on to the railing. "What?" "Call Tony. I don't move until you do." He went back into the living room. It looked amazingly warm and safe and cozy, and picked up the phone. It was a worthless gesture, really. With the wind, I couldn't hear what he was saying. He put the phone down and returned. "Taken care of, Mr. Norris." "It better be." "Goodbye, Mr. Norris. I'll see you in a bit. Perhaps." It was time to do it. Talking was done. I let myself think of Marcia one last time, her light brown hair, her wide gray eyes, her lovely body, and then put her out of my mind for good. No more looking down, either. It would have been too easy to get paralyzed, looking down through that space. Too easy to just freeze up until you lost your balance or just fainted from fear. It was time for tunnel vision. Time to concentrate on nothing but left foot, right foot. I began to move to the right, holding on to the balcony's railing as long as I could. It didn't take long to see I was going to need all the tennis muscle my ankles had. With my heels beyond the edge, those tendons would be taking all my weight. I got to the end of the balcony, and for a moment I didn't think I was going to be able to let go of that safety. I forced myself to do it. 5 inches. Hell, that was plenty of room. If the ledge were only a foot off the ground instead of 400 feet, you could breeze around this building in 4 minutes flat, I told myself. So just pretend it is. Yeah, and if you fall from a ledge a foot off the ground, you just say rats and try again. Up here, you get only one chance. I slid my right foot farther, and then brought my left foot next to it. I let go of the railing. I put my open hands up, allowing the palms to rest against the rough stone of the apartment building. I caressed the stone. I could have kissed it. A gust of wind hit me, snapping the collar of my jacket against my face, making my body sway on the ledge. My heart jumped into my throat and stayed there until the wind had died down. A strong enough gust would have peeled me right off my perch and sent me flying down into the night, and the wind would be stronger on the other side. I turned my head to the left, pressing my cheek against the stone. Kressner was leaning over the balcony, watching me. "Enjoyin' yourself?" he asked affably. He was wearing a brown camel's hair overcoat. "I thought you said you didn't have a coat," I said. "I lied," he answered equably. "I lie about a lot of things." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Nothing at all. Or perhaps it does mean something. A little psychological warfare, eh, Mr. Norris? I should tell you not to linger over long. The ankles grow tired, and if they should give way—" He took an apple out of his pocket, bit into it, and then tossed it over the edge. There was no sound for a long time. Then a faint and sickening plop. Kressner chuckled. He had broken my concentration, and I could feel panic nibbling at the edges of my mind with steel teeth. A torrent of terror wanted to rush in and drown me. I turned my head away from him and did deep breathing, flushing panic away. I was looking at the lighted bank sign, which now said 8:46. Time to save at Mutual. By the time the lighted numbers read 8:49, I felt that I had myself under control again. I think Kressner must have decided I'd frozen, and I heard a sardonic patter of applause when I began to shuffle toward the corner of the building again. I began to feel the cold. The lake had wetted the edge of the wind. Its clammy dampness bit at my skin like an auger. My thin jacket billowed out behind me as I shuffled along. I moved slowly, cold or not. If I was going to do this, I would have to do it slowly and deliberately. If I rushed, I would fall. The bank clock read 8:52 when I reached the corner. It didn't appear to be a problem. The ledge went right around, making a square corner, but my right hand told me that there was a crosswind. If I got caught leaning the wrong way, I would take a long ride very quickly. I waited for the wind to drop, but for a long time it refused to, almost as though it were Kressner's willing ally. It slapped against me with vicious, invisible fingers, prying and poking and tickling. At last, after a particularly strong gust had made me rock on my toes, I knew that I could wait forever and the wind would never drop all the way off. So, the next time it sank a little, I slipped my right foot around and, clutching both walls with my hands, I made the turn. The crosswind pushed me 2 ways at once, and I tottered. For a second, I was sickeningly sure that Kressner had won his wager. Then I slid a step farther along and pressed myself tightly against the wall, a held breath slipping out of my dry throat. That was when the raspberry went off, almost in my ear. Startled, I jerked back to the very edge of balance. My hands lost the wall and pinwheeled crazily for balance. I think that if one of them had hit the stone face of the building, I would have been gone. But after what seemed an eternity, gravity decided to let me return to the wall instead of sending me down to the pavement 43 stories below. My breath sobbed out of my lungs in a pained whistle. My legs were rubbery. The tendons in my ankles were humming like high-voltage wires. I had never felt so mortal. The man with the sickle was close enough to read over my shoulder. I twisted my neck, looked up, and there was Kressner, leaning out of his bedroom window 4 feet above me. He was smiling. In his right hand he held a New Year's Eve noisemaker. "Just keeping you on your toes," he said. I didn't waste my breath. I couldn't have spoken above a croak anyway. My heart was thudding crazily in my chest. I sidled 5 or 6 feet along, just in case he was thinking about leaning out and giving me a good shove. Then I stopped and closed my eyes and deep-breathed until I had my act back together again. I was on the short side of the building now. On my right, only the highest towers of the city bulked above me. On the left, only the dark circle of the lake, with a few pinpricks of light which floated on it. The wind whooped and moaned. The crosswind at the second corner was not so tricky, and I made it around with no trouble. And then something bit me. I gasped and jerked. The shift of balance scared me, and I pressed tightly against the building. I was bitten again. No, not bitten, but pecked. I looked down. There was a pigeon standing on the ledge, looking up with bright, hateful eyes. You get used to pigeons in the city. They're as common as cab drivers who can't change a 10. They don't like to fly, and they give ground grudgingly, as if the sidewalks were theirs by squatters' rights. Oh, yes, and you're apt to find their calling cards on the hood of your car. But you never take much notice. They may be occasionally irritating, but they're interlopers in our world. But I was in his, and I was nearly helpless, and he seemed to know it. He pecked my tired right ankle again, sending a bright dart of pain up my leg. "Get!" I snarled at it. "Get out!" The pigeon only pecked me again. I was obviously in what he regarded as his home. This section of the ledge was covered with droppings, old and new. A muted cheeping from above. I cricked my neck as far back as it would go and looked up. A beak darted at my face, and I almost recoiled. If I had, I might have become the city's first pigeon-induced casualty. It was Mama Pigeon, protecting a bunch of baby pigeons just under the slight overhang of the roof. Too far up to peck my head, thank God. Her husband pecked me again, and now blood was flowing. I could feel it. I began to inch my way along again, hoping to scare the pigeons off the ledge. No way. Pigeons don't scare, not city pigeons anyway. If a moving van only makes them amble a little faster, a man pinned on a high ledge isn't going to upset them at all. The pigeon backpedaled as I shuffled forward, his bright eyes never leaving my face except when the sharp beak dipped to peck my ankle. And the pain was getting more intense now. The bird was pecking at raw flesh, and eating it for all I knew. I kicked at it with my right foot. It was a weak kick, the only kind I could afford. The pigeon only fluttered its wings a bit and then returned to the attack. I, on the other hand, almost went off the side. The pigeon pecked me again. A cold blast of wind struck me, rocking me to the limit of balance. Pads of my fingers scraped at the bland stone, and I came to rest with my left cheek pressed against the wall, breathing heavily. Kressner couldn't have conceived of worse torture if he had planned it for 10 years. One peck was not so bad. 2 or 3 were little more. But that damned bird must have pecked me 60 times before I reached the wrought iron railing of the penthouse opposite Kressner's. Reaching that railing was like reaching the gates of heaven. My hands curled sweetly around the cold uprights and held on, if they would never let go. Peck! The pigeon was staring up at me almost smugly with its bright eyes, confident of my impotence and its own invulnerability. I was reminded of Kressner's expression when he had ushered me out onto the balcony on the other side of the building. Gripping the iron bars more tightly, I lashed out with a hard, strong kick and caught the pigeon squarely. It emitted a wholly satisfying squawk and rose into the air, wings flapping. A few feathers, dove-gray, settled back to the ledge or disappeared slowly down into the darkness, swan-boating back and forth in the air. Gasping, I crawled up onto the balcony and collapsed there. Despite the cold, my body was dripping with sweat. I don't know how long I lay there, recuperating. The building hid the bank clock, and I don't wear a watch. I sat up before my muscles could stiffen up on me and gingerly rolled down my sock. The right ankle was lacerated and bleeding, but the wound looked superficial. Still, I would have to have it taken care of if I ever got out of this. God knows what germs pigeons carry around. I thought of bandaging the raw skin, but decided not to. I might stumble on a tied bandage. Time enough later. Then I could buy $20,000 worth of bandages. I got up and looked longingly into the darkened penthouse opposite Kressner's. Barren, empty, unlived in. The heavy storm screen was over this door. I might have been able to break in, but that would have been forfeiting the bet, and I had more to lose than money. When I could put it off no longer, I slipped over the railing and back onto the ledge. The pigeon, a few feathers worse for wear, was standing below his mate's nest, where the guano was thickest, eyeing me balefully. But I didn't think he'd bother me, not when he saw I was moving away. It was very hard to move away, much harder than it had been to leave Kressner's balcony. My mind knew I had to, but my body, particularly my ankles, was screaming that it would be folly to leave such a safe harbor. But I did leave, with Marcia's face in the darkness urging me on. I got to the second short side, made it around the corner, and shuffled slowly across the width of the building. Now that I was getting close, there was an almost ungovernable urge to hurry, to get it over with. But if I hurried, I would die. So I forced myself to go slowly. The crosswind almost got me again on the fourth corner, and I slipped around it thanks to luck rather than skill. I rested against the building, getting my breath back. But for the first time, I knew that I was going to make it, that I was going to win. My hands felt like half-frozen steaks. My ankles hurt like fire, especially the pigeon-pecked right ankle. Sweat kept trickling in my eyes, but I knew I was going to make it. Halfway down the length of the building, warm yellow light spilled out on Kressner's balcony. Far beyond, I could see the blank sign glowing like a welcome home banner. The bank sign, sorry. It was 10:48, but it seemed that I had spent my whole life on those 5 inches of ledge. And God help Kressner if he tried to welsh. The urge to hurry was gone. I almost lingered. It was 11:09 when I put first my right hand on the wrought iron balcony railing, and then my left. I hauled myself up, wriggled over the top, collapsed thankfully on the floor, and felt the cold steel muzzle of a .45 against my temple. I looked up and saw a goon ugly enough to stop Big Ben dead in its clockwork. He was grinning. "Excellent!" Kressner's voice said from within. "I applaud you, Mr. Norris." He proceeded to do just that. "Bring him in, Tony." Tony hauled me up and set me on my feet so abruptly that my weak ankles almost buckled. Going in, I staggered against the balcony door. Kressner was standing by the living room fireplace, sipping brandy from a goblet the size of a fishbowl. The money had been replaced in the shopping bag. It still stood in the middle of the burnt orange rug. I caught a glimpse of myself in a small mirror on the other side of the room. The hair was disheveled, the face pallid except for 2 bright spots of color on the cheeks. The eyes looked insane. I got only a glimpse, because of the next moment I was flying across the room. I hit the Basque chair and fell over it, pulling it down on top of me and losing my wind. When I got some of it back, I sat up and managed, "You lousy Welsher, you had this planned." "Indeed I did," Kressner said, carefully setting his brandy on the mantel. "But I'm not a Welsher, Mr. Norris. Indeed, no. Just an extremely poor loser. Tony is here only to make sure you don't do anything ill-advised." He put his fingers under his chin and tittered a little. He didn't look like a poor loser. He looked more like a cat with canary feathers on its muzzle. I got up, suddenly feeling more frightened than I had on the ledge. "You fixed it," I said slowly. "Somehow you fixed it." "Not at all. The heroin has been removed from your car. The car itself is back in the parking lot. The money is over there. You may take it and go." "Fine," I said. Tony stood by the glass door to the balcony, still looking like a leftover from Halloween. The .45 was in his hand. I walked over to the shopping bag, picked it up, and walked toward the door on my jittery ankles, fully expecting to be shot down in my tracks. But when I got the door open, I began to have the same feeling that I'd had on the ledge when I rounded the fourth corner. I was going to make it. Kressner's voice, lazy and amused, stopped me. "You don't really think that old lady's room Dodge fooled anyone, do you? I turned back, slowly, the shopping bag in my arms. What do you mean? I told you I never wilsh, and I never do. You won three things, Mr. Norris. The money, your freedom, my wife. You have the first two. You can pick up the third at the county morgue. I stared at him, unable to move, frozen in a soundless thunderclap of shock. You didn't really think I'd let you have her? He asked me pityingly. Oh, no. The money, yes. Your freedom, yes. But not Marcia. Still, I don't welsh. And after you've had her buried... I didn't go near him. Not then. He was for later. I walked toward Tony, who looked slightly surprised until Kressner said in a bored voice, Shoot him, please. I threw the bag of money. It hit him squarely in the gun hand, and it struck him hard. I hadn't been using my arms and wrists out there, and they're the best part of any tennis player. His bullet went into the burnt orange rug, and then I had him. His face was the toughest part of him. I yanked the gun out of his hand and hit him across the bridge of the nose with the barrel. He went down with a single very weary grunt, looking like Rondo Hatton. Kressner was almost out the door when I snapped a shot over his shoulder and said, Stop right there or you're dead. He thought about it and stopped. When he turned around, his cosmopolitan, world-weary act had curdled a little around the edges. It curdled a little more when he saw Tony lying on the floor and choking on his own blood. She's not dead, he said quickly. I had to salvage something, didn't I? He gave me a sick, cheese-eating grin. I'm a sucker, but I'm not that big a sucker, I said. My voice sounded lifeless, dead. Why not? Marcia had been my life, and this man had just put her on a slab. With a finger that trembled slightly, Kressner pointed at the money tumbled around Tony's feet. That, he said, that's chicken feed. I could get you 100,000, or 5. Or how about 1,000,000? All of it in a Swiss bank account. How about that? How about... I'll make you a bet, I said slowly. He looked from the barrel of the gun to my face. A bet, I repeated. Not a wager. Just a plain old bet. I'll bet you can't walk around this building on the ledge out there. His face went dead pale. For a moment, I thought he was going to faint. You, he whispered. These are the stakes, I said in my dead voice. If you make it, I'll let you go. How's that? No, he whispered. His eyes were huge, staring. Okay, I said, and cocked the pistol. No, he said, holding his hands out. No, don't. All right. He licked his lips. I motioned with the gun, and he preceded me out onto the balcony. You're shaking, I told him. That's going to make it harder. 2,000,000, he said, and he couldn't get his voice above a husky whine. 2,000,000 in unmarked bills. No, I said, not for 10,000,000. But if you make it, you go free. I'm serious. A minute later, he was standing on that ledge. He was shorter than I. You could just see his eyes over the edge, wide and beseeching, and his white-knuckled hands gripping the iron rail like prison bars. Please, he whispered, anything. You're wasting time, I said. It takes it out of the ankles. But he wouldn't move until I put the muzzle of the gun against his forehead. Then he began to shuffle to the right, moaning. I glanced up at the bank clock. It was 11:29. I didn't think he was going to make it to the first corner. He didn't want to budge at all, and when he did, he moved jerkily, taking risks with his center of gravity, his dressing gown billowing into the night. He disappeared around the corner and out of sight at 12:01, almost 40 minutes ago. I listened closely for the diminishing scream as the crosswind got him, but it didn't come. Maybe the wind had dropped. I do remember thinking the wind was on his side when I was out there. Or maybe he was just lucky. Maybe he's out on the other balcony now, quivering in a heap, afraid to go any farther. But he probably knows that if I catch him there, when I break into the other penthouse, I'll shoot him down like a dog. And speaking of the other side of the building, I wonder how he likes the pigeon. Was that a scream? I don't know. It might have been the wind. It doesn't matter. The bank clock says 12:44. Pretty soon I'll break into the other apartment and check the balcony, but right now I'm just sitting here on Kressner's balcony with Tony's .45 in my hand, just on the off chance that he might come around that last corner with his dressing gown billowing out around him. Kressner said he's never welched on a bet, but I've been known to. And that was The Ledge by Stephen King. Ah, good stuff. Nice. I'd probably compare it to Alfred Hitchcock, maybe. Ah, let's see. Let's see what time are we looking at? 12:51. Yeah, I got time for more. I got time for more. Let's do this. Let's do Lawnmower Man. Not to be confused with the movie with Pierce Brosnan involving people being uploaded into virtual reality or their brains or something. I haven't watched that movie in a million years. I think there were sequels too, and I assume they were terrible. Uh, I imagine that is a very safe bet. As I recall, that movie was kind of a Flowers for Algernon type thing, where you've got a guy who's, I hesitate to say retarded, mentally deficient, uh, low IQ, who winds up having like a brain treatment that makes him smarter and smarter and smarter until, of course, he tries to take over the world, as you do. Unlike Flowers for Algernon, where the guy, as he got smarter, just kind of became a total asshole. And then got dumber again. Yay! What an uplifting story. Ugh. It's actually incredibly depressing. But in any case, this is not like that. This involves, I don't know, grass magic. Uh, it's a little vulgar. Um, but beyond that, and then with any luck, I'll have time for Quitters Incorporated, which is another. It's exceptionally morbid. It's kind of a suspenseful horror type. The situation is horrific, and some of the things done are horrific, but it doesn't have like, I don't know, boogeymen or spooks. Well, spooks in one sense, I guess, but not the other. Okay, let's take another swig of fluid. Dehydrate easily doing this. I hope folks are enjoying this. If you're just tuning in, this is Storytime Saturdays, and I'm the narrator, Fragath, and we're doing some Stephen King short stories because they're fun. Okay, what do we got here? Yes, good, I didn't lose the page. We're winning, boys, we're winning. And girls, equal opportunity. My brain just died. There we go, it's back. The Lawnmower Man by Stephen King. In previous years, Harold Parquet had always taken pride in his lawn. He had owned a large silver lawn boy and paid the boy down the block $5 per cutting to push it. In those days, Harold Parquet had followed the Boston Red Sox on the radio with a beer in his hand and the knowledge that God was in his heaven and all was right with the world, including his lawn. But last year, in mid-October, fate had played Harold Parquet a nasty trick. While the boy was mowing the grass for the last time of the season, the Kastenmeyer's dog had chased the Smith's cat under the mower. Harold's daughter had thrown up half a quart of cherry Kool-Aid into the lap of her new jumper, and his wife had nightmares for a week afterward. Although she had arrived after the fact, she had arrived in time to see Harold and the green-faced boy cleaning the blades. Their daughter and Mrs. Smith stood over them, weeping, although Alicia had taken time enough to change her jumper for a pair of blue jeans and one of those disgusting skimpy sweaters. She had a crush on the boy who mowed the lawn. After a week of listening to his wife moan and gobble in the next bed, Harold decided to get rid of the mower. He didn't really need the mower anyway, he supposed. He had hired a boy this year. Next year he would just hire a boy and a mower. And maybe Carla would stop moaning in her sleep. He might even get laid again. So he took the silver lawn boy down to Phil's Sunoco, and he and Phil dickered over it. Harold came away with a brand new Kelly Blackwall tire and a tank full of high test, and Phil put the silver lawn boy out on one of the pump islands with a hand-lettered "For Sale" sign on it. And this year, Harold just kept putting off the necessary hiring. When he finally got around to calling last year's boy, his mother told him Frank had gone to State University. Harold shook his head in wonder and went to the refrigerator to get a beer. Time certainly flew, didn't it? My God, yes. He put off hiring a new boy as first May and then June slipped past him, and the Red Sox continued to wallow in fourth place. He sat on the back porch on the weekends and watched glumly as a never-ending progression of young boys he had never seen before popped out to mutter a quick hello before taking his buxom daughter off to the local passion pit. And the grass thrived and grew in a marvelous way. It was a good summer for grass. 3 days of shine followed by one of gentle rain, almost like clockwork. By mid-July, the lawn looked more like a meadow than a suburbanite's backyard, and Jack Kastenmeier had begun to make all sorts of extremely unfunny jokes, most of which concerned the price of hay and alfalfa. And Don Smith's 4-year-old daughter, Jenny, had taken to hiding in it when there was oatmeal for breakfast or spinach for supper. One day, in late July, Harold went out on the patio during the seventh-inning stretch and saw a woodchuck sitting perkily on the overgrown back walk. The time had come, he decided. He flicked off the radio, picked up the paper, and turned to the classifieds. And halfway down the part-time column, he found this: Lawns mowed. Reasonable. 776-2390. Harold called the number, expecting a vacuuming housewife who would yell outside for her son. Instead, a briskly professional voice said, "Pastoral Greenery and Outdoor Services. How may we help you?" Cautiously, Harold told the voice how Pastoral Greenery could help him. Had it come to this, then? Were lawn cutters starting their own businesses and hiring office help? He asked the voice about rates, and the voice quoted him a reasonable figure. Harold hung up with a lingering feeling of unease and went back to the porch. He sat down, turned on the radio, and stared out over his glandular lawn at the Saturday clouds moving slowly across the Saturday sky. Carla and Alicia were at his mother-in-law's, and the house was his. It would be a pleasant surprise for them if the boy who was coming to cut the lawn finished before they came back. He cracked a beer and sighed as Dick Drago was touched for a double and then hit a batter. A little breeze shuffled across the screened-in porch. Crickets hummed softly in the long grass. Harold grunted something unkind about Dick Drago and then dozed off. He was jarred awake half an hour later by the doorbell. He knocked over his beer, getting up to answer it. A man in grass-stained denim overalls stood on the front stoop, chewing a toothpick. He was fat. The curve of his belly pushed his faded blue overalls out to a point where Harold half suspected he had swallowed a basketball. Yes?" Harold Parkett asked, still half asleep. The man grinned, rolled his toothpick from one corner of his mouth to the other, tugged at the seat of his overalls, and then pushed his green baseball cap up a notch on his forehead. There was a smear of fresh engine oil on the bill of his cap. And there he was, smelling of grass, earth, and oil, grinning at Harold Parkett.
"Pastoral sent me, buddy," he said jovially, scratching his crotch. "You called me, right? Right, buddy?"
He grinned on endlessly. "Ah, the lawn. You?" Harold stared stupidly.
"Yep, me."
The lawnmower man bellowed fresh laughter into Harold's sleep-puffy face. Harold stood helplessly aside, and the lawnmower man tromped ahead of him down the hall, through the living room and kitchen, and onto the back porch. Now Harold had placed the man, and everything was all right. He had seen the type before, working for the sanitation department and the highway repair crews out on the turnpike, always with a spare minute to lean on their shovels and smoke Lucky Strikes or Camels, looking at you as if they were the salt of the earth, able to hit you for $5 or sleep with your wife any time they wanted to. Harold had always been slightly afraid of men like this. They were always tanned dark brown. There were always nets of wrinkles around their eyes, and they always knew what to do. "The back lawn's the real chore," he told the man, unconsciously deepening his voice. "It's square and there are no obstructions, but it's pretty well grown up." His voice faltered back into its normal register, and he found himself apologizing. "I'm afraid I've let it go."
"No sweat, buddy. No strain. Great, great, great."
The lawnmower man grinned at him with 1,000 traveling salesman jokes in his eyes.
"The taller the better. Healthy soil, that's what you got there, by Circe. That's what I always say."
"By Circe?" The lawnmower man cocked his head at the radio. Yastrzemski had just struck out.
"Red Sox fan? I'm a Yankees fan myself."
He clumped back into the house and down the front hall. Harold watched him bitterly. He sat back down and looked accusingly for a moment at the puddle of beer under the table with the overturned Coors can in the middle of it. He thought of getting the mop from the kitchen and decided it would keep. No sweat, no strain. He opened his paper to the financial section and cast a judicious eye at the closing stock quotations. As a good Republican, he considered the Wall Street executives behind the columned type to be at least minor demigods. By Circe? And he had wished many times that he could better understand the Word, as handed down from the Mount, not on stone tablets, but in such enigmatic abbreviations as PCT and KDK and 3.28 up 2/3. He had once bought a judicious 3 shares in a company called Midwest Bison Burgers Incorporated that had gone broke in 1968. He had lost his entire $75 investment. Now, he understood, bison burgers were quite the coming thing, the wave of the future. He had discussed this often with Sonny, the bartender down at the Goldfish Bowl. Sonny told Harold his trouble was that he was 5 years ahead of his time, and he should... A sudden racketing roar startled him out of the new doze he had just been slipping into. Harold jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over and staring around wildly. "That's a lawnmower?" Harold Parkett asked the kitchen. "My God, that's a lawnmower!" He rushed through the house and stared out the front door. There was nothing out there but a battered green van with the words Pastoral Greenery Incorporated painted on the side. The roaring sound was in back now. Harold rushed through his house again, burst onto the back porch, and stood frozen. It was obscene. It was a travesty. The aged red power mower the fat man had brought in his van was running on its own. No one was pushing it. In fact, no one was within 5 feet of it. It was running at a fever pitch, tearing through the unfortunate grass of Harold Parkett's back lawn like an avenging red devil straight from hell. It screamed and bellowed and farted oily blue smoke in a crazed kind of mechanical madness that made Harold feel ill with terror. The overripe smell of cut grass hung in the air like sour wine. But the lawnmower man was the true obscenity. The lawnmower man had removed his clothes, every stitch. They were folded neatly in the empty bird bath that was at the center of the back lawn. Naked and grass-stained, he was crawling along about 5 feet behind the mower, eating the cut grass. Green juice ran down his chin and dripped onto his pendulous belly. And every time the lawnmower whirled around a corner, he rose and did an odd, skipping jump before prostrating himself again. "Stop!" Harold Parkett screamed. "Stop that!" But the lawnmower man took no notice, and his screaming scarlet familiar never slowed. If anything, it seemed to speed up. Its nicked steel grill seemed to grin sweatily at Harold as it raved by. Then Harold saw the mole. It must have been hiding in stunned terror just ahead of the mower, in the swath of grass about to be slaughtered. It bolted across the cut band of lawn towards safety under the porch, a panicky brown streak. The lawnmower swerved. Blatting and howling, it roared over the mole and spat it out in a string of fur and entrails that reminded Harold of the smith's cat. The mole destroyed, the lawnmower rushed back to the main job. The lawnmower man crawled rapidly by, eating grass. Harold stood paralyzed with horror, stocks, bonds, and bison burgers completely forgotten. He could actually see that huge pendulous belly expanding. The lawnmower man swerved and ate the mole. That was when Harold Parkett leaned out the screen door and vomited into the zinnias. The world went gray, and suddenly he realized he was fainting, had fainted. He collapsed backward onto the porch and closed his eyes. Someone was shaking him. Carla was shaking him. He hadn't done the dishes or emptied the garbage, and Carla was going to be very angry, but that was all right. As long as she was waking him up, taking him out of the horrible dream he had been having, back into the normal world. Nice, normal Carla, with her Playtex living girdle and her buck teeth. Buck teeth, yes, but not Carla's buck teeth. Carla had weak-looking chipmunk buck teeth, but these teeth were hairy. Green hair was growing on these buck teeth. It almost looked like grass? "Oh, my God," Harold said. "You fainted, buddy, right? Huh?" The lawnmower man was bending over him, grinning with his hairy teeth. His lips and chin were hairy, too. Everything was hairy and green. The yard stank of grass and gas and too sudden silence. Harold bolted up to a sitting position and stared at the dead mower. All the grass had been neatly cut. And there would be no need to rake this job, Harold observed sickly. If the lawnmower man had missed a single cut blade, he couldn't see it. He squinted obliquely at the lawnmower man and winced. He was still naked, still fat, still terrifying. Green trickles ran from the corner of his mouth. "What is this?" Harold begged. The man waved an arm benignly at the lawn. "This? Well, it's a new thing the boss has been trying. It works out real good. Real good, buddy. We're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We keep getting along toward the final stage, and we're making money to support our other operations to boot. See what I mean? Of course, every now and then we run into a customer who doesn't understand. Some people got no respect for efficiency, right? But the boss is always agreeable to a sacrifice. Sorta keeps the wheels greased, if you catch me." Harold said nothing. One word knelled over and over in his mind, and that word was sacrifice. In his mind's eye he saw the mole spewing out from under the battered red mower. He got up, slowly, like a palsied old man. "Of course," he said, and could only come up with a line from one of Alicia's folk rock records. God bless the grass. The lawnmower man slapped one summer apple-colored thigh.
That's pretty good, buddy. In fact, that's damned good. I can see you got the right spirit. Okay, if I write that one down when I get back to the office? Might mean a promotion.
Certainly, Harold said, retreating toward the back door and striving to keep his melting smile in place. You go right ahead and finish. I think I'll take a little nap.
Sure, buddy,
the lawnmower man said, getting ponderously to his feet. Harold noticed the unusually deep split between his first and second toes, almost as if the feet were, well, cloven.
It's everybody kind of hard at first, the lawnmower man said. You'll get used to it.
He eyed Harold's portly figure shrewdly.
In fact, you might even want to give it a whirl yourself. The boss has always got an eye out for new talent.
The boss, Harold repeated faintly. The lawnmower man paused at the bottom of the steps and gazed tolerantly up at Harold Parkett.
Well, say, buddy, I figured you must have guessed. God bless the grass and all.
Harold shook his head carefully, and the lawnmower man laughed. Pan's the boss. And he did a half-hop, half-shuffle in the newly cut grass, and the lawnmower screamed into life and began to trundle around the house. The neighbors, Harold began, but the lawnmower man only waved cheerily and disappeared. Out front, the lawnmower blatted and howled. Harold Parkett refused to look, as if by refusing he could deny the grotesque spectacle that the Kastenmeyers and the Smiths, wretched Democrats both, were probably thinking in horrified but no doubt righteously I told you so eyes. Were probably drinking in with horrified but no doubt righteously I told you so eyes. Sorry about that. Instead of looking, Harold went to the telephone, snatched it up, and dialed police headquarters from the emergency decal pasted on the phone's handset. Sergeant Hall, the voice at the other end said. Harold stuck a finger in his free ear and said, My name is Harold Parkett. My address is 1421 East Endicott Street. I'd like to report... What? What would he like to report? A man is in the process of raping and murdering my lawn, and he works for a fellow named Pan and has cloven feet? Yes, Mr. Parkett? Inspiration struck. I'd like to report a case of indecent exposure. Indecent exposure, Sergeant Hall repeated. Yes, there's a man mowing my lawn. He's in the, altogether. You mean he's naked? Sergeant Hall asked, politely incredulous. Naked, Harold agreed, holding tightly to the frayed ends of his sanity. Nude, unclothed, bare-assed, on my front lawn. Now, will you get somebody the hell over here? That address was 1421 West Endicott? Sergeant Hall asked bemusedly. East, Harold yelled, for God's sake! And you say he's definitely naked? You are able to observe his, genitals and so forth? Harold tried to speak and could only gargle. The sound of the insane lawnmower seemed to be growing louder and louder, drowning out everything in the universe. He felt his gorge rise. Can you speak up? Sergeant Hall buzzed. There's an awfully noisy connection there at your end. The front door crashed open. Harold looked around and saw the lawnmower man's mechanized familiar advancing through the door. Behind it came the lawnmower man himself, still quite naked. With something approaching true insanity, Harold saw the man's pubic hair was a rich, fertile green. He was twirling his baseball cap on one finger. That was a mistake, buddy, said the lawnmower man reproachfully. You should have stuck with God bless the grass. Hello? Hello, Mr. Parkett? The telephone dropped from Harold's nerveless fingers as the lawnmower began to advance on him, cutting through the nap of Carla's new mohawk rug and spitting out brown hunks of fiber as it came. Harold stared at it with a kind of bird and snake fascination until it reached the coffee table. When the mower shunted it aside, shearing one leg into sawdust and splinters as it did so, he climbed over the back of his chair and began to retreat toward the kitchen, dragging the chair in front of him.
That won't do any good, buddy, the lawnmower man said kindly. Have to be messy, too. Now, if you was just to show me where you keep your sharpest butcher knife, we could get this sacrifice business out of the way, real painless. I think the bird bath would do. And then...
Harold shoved the chair at the lawnmower, which had been craftily flanking him while the naked man drew his attention, and bolted through the doorway. The lawnmower roared around the chair, jetting out exhaust, and as Harold smashed open the porch screen door, he leaped down the steps. He heard it, smelled it, felt it, right at his heels. The lawnmower roared off the top step like a skier going off a jump. Harold sprinted across his newly cut back lawn, but there had been too many beers, too many afternoon naps. He could sense it nearing him, then on his heels, and then he looked over his shoulder and tripped over his own feet. The last thing Harold Parkett saw was the grinning grill of the charging lawnmower rocking back to reveal its flashing, green-stained blades, and above it the fat face of the lawnmower man, shaking his head in good-natured reproof. "Hell of a thing," Lieutenant Goodwin said as the last of the photographs were taken. He nodded to the two men in white, and they trundled their basket across the lawn. "He reported some naked guy on his lawn not 2 hours ago." "Is that so?" Patrolman Cooley asked. "Yeah. One of the neighbors called it in, too. Guy named Kastenmeyer. He thought it was Parkett himself. Maybe it was, Cooley. Maybe it was." "Sir?" "Crazy with the heat," Lieutenant Goodwin said gravely, and tapped his temple. "Schizo-fucking-phrenia." "Yes, sir," Cooley said respectfully. "Where's the rest of 'em?" said one of the white coats. One of the white coats asked. "The bird bath," Goodwin said. He looked profoundly up at the sky. "Did you say the bird bath?" the white coat asked. "Indeed I did," Lieutenant Goodwin agreed. Patrolman Cooley looked at the bird bath and suddenly lost most of his tan. "Sex maniac," Lieutenant Goodwin said. "Must have been." "Prince?" Cooley asked thickly. "You might as well ask for footprints," Goodwin said. He gestured at the newly cut grass. Patrolman Cooley made a strangled noise in his throat. Lieutenant Goodwin stuffed his hands into his pockets and rocked back on his heels. "The world," he said gravely, "is full of nuts. Never forget that, Cooley. Schizos. Lab boys say somebody chased Parkett through his own living room with a lawnmower. Can you imagine that?" "No, sir," Cooley said. Goodwin looked out over Harold Parkett's neatly manicured lawn. "Well, like the man said when he saw the black-haired Swede, it surely is a Norse of a different color." Goodwin strolled around the house, and Cooley followed him. Behind them, the scent of newly mown grass hung pleasantly in the air. And that was The Lawnmower Man by Stephen King. Grotesque, yes, but in good humor, if you will. And with that, actually something just came up, so I am going to have to scoot earlier than I would have liked. But next week we will do Quitters Incorporated and one other. Probably not Children of the Corn. It's long and it's kind of boring. If creepy, I'll admit. Last Rung of the Ladder is really hard to keep straight. I don't think it's The Man Who Loved Flowers. Although we could do that one too. That one is, it's about a serial killer. No big deal. Could also do gray matter. That one's pretty good. Or trucks. Yeah. Those are also fairly horrifying, but entertaining in their way. All right. Thanks for tuning in. I'll make sure to get this set into the... oh, gosh. What does YouTube call those? The sub-channel. Make sure it's organized. I'll make sure it's organized. There we go. Words. Words are good. Words are great. We use words. Words are handy. Yeah, I'll have that organized and set by the end of the day. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you're enjoying. As always, I do this every week, same time, usually a little longer, but lately I've had scheduling constraints. I also do a stream on Monday, my Mecha Mondays stream, where I do something with giant robots or giant robot adjacent, or just mecha adjacent. Powered armor counts, darn it. And Warframe Wednesdays, where I do something Warframe related. All the same time, around noon Eastern Standard. And that's about it. Have a great weekend and enjoy life to the fullest. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.